Hi guys, so today I'll talk a little bit about Chum Kui. We'll start with a bit of an overview and then we'll go into some of the specifics. Mainly I'll just do the first part of Chum Kui. It's best to go over that first. I find with most forms the first part of the form is always the biggest leap. So with each form you learn, it's almost a quantum leap from the other form, which makes it particularly difficult learning each form. So moving from Sudim Tao to Chum Kui is actually a pretty big move, and if you've not got the strong foundations of Sudim Tao, Chum Kui is going to be very difficult to make work. Part of the reason is everything builds on each form. So for Chum Kui to work, you've got to have Sudim Tao working. Remember, in Sudim Tao you're static, you've got your basic stance, and you're moving one limb at a time, whereas in Chum Kui you're moving two. In Chum Kui you have to have the upper part of the body, the upper triangle working, and then you've got the lower triangle working as well, and you have to make them work in conjunction. So it's a lot about making the top and the bottom half of the body work together. So if your top half isn't working and you haven't got a strong stable stance, it's going to be very difficult to coordinate the two. So the start of the form is almost the same. You open your stance, but you're slightly higher. So when you open your stance, you're actually going to come up slightly. Just open it and just relax it a little bit, because you're going to be moving, and the basic stance you can't move in or out of. It's not built for that. Mark the centre line as usual, punches and the Hun Tao as usual, and then you come to the first thing that challenges or breaks assumptions you had when doing Sudim Tao. So this is Ding Sao here. So the difference with Ding Sao is before you were taught that your strikes always had to rise, and that doesn't change. When you strike, this is incoming strike, my strike is still going to go up, but this is teaching me how to strike without necessarily my limb going in this direction up. So it teaches me, if you see this plane here, my wrist doesn't go up, it stays the same, and then I strike. And it's teaching you that here, like this, going forwards, like that. So that's Ding Sao. This movement, it doesn't necessarily have to be two-handed. It could be, if someone's in front of you and you just want to give them a little shake, that's a good movement. Not necessarily strike, you could just contact and then just apply a little bit of energy, just jolt them. Once again, these are all down to situational awareness and decisions you make in the moment. There's also a little bit in Ding Sao about being able to control the elbow and still strike, but I'll leave that for another video. But for now, this is Ding Sao. Now the next move is here. So you've got double Lan Sao. You've turned to the left on top, and then you move three of these movements. So this is really key. So traditionally, you'd learn Sudim Tao for 9 months, and there'd be no turning punches, no turning Tan Saos, no turning Vong Saos. This is all brought in by Yip Man later, because all his students were getting in fights in Hong Kong, and they didn't have really 9 months to wait to get to this. So he brought it along a little bit. But when you do Chum Kui, it gives something different to it than when you're doing Sudim Tao. And the difference is, you've got to think of your lower horse as your engine. That's driving the techniques. And what you're doing with Chum Kui is you're tuning your engine. You're making it as good as you possibly can. So rather than punching this way in Sudim Tao, when you learn Chum Kui, you learn to add a little bit more power to each punch, using the hips, using the power of the body to add even more. You learn to punch your body weight, just like in countless other martial arts or boxing or any contact sport where you learn to strike and use your body weight. It's the same in Wing Chun, it's just the delivery system's a little bit different. So to do that, you have to go through quite a complicated process of the lower horse or the lower part of your body, your stance, moving first before your upper body. So the lower part moves first, then the upper body, but they arrive together. And the analogy you've got to think of is if you imagine one car towing another car and they're attached by a rope. The first car sets off, and then the energy that the first car has is transferred through the rope into the rear car and pulls it along. But it doesn't. There's no gradual speed up. So the first car is obviously going to be speeding up gradually, accelerating, but the rear car doesn't have that gradual acceleration. It immediately jumps to the speed of the first car, and that's what's happening here. So when I punch, my hips move first, and there's a little torsion motion happening, and that pulls my upper body around. So my hips move, and that adds to the upper body, but they arrive together, and what they both do is they both add to the impact here. So even though the lower part is moving first, there's still my upper body is not behind. There are different. I mean, you can go into this another time, but there are different ways of punching. You could think of the lower part of the body being the hammer and the upper part being the nail. Whereas you throw the strike forwards, and then the hips drive in as a kind of secondary motor or engine to drive that strike in. But we're not dealing with that here. We're dealing with the basic power generation in Wing Chun, which comes from Chum Kui. So to practice this, I remember this is not a technique. You must remember all of these things are not to be taken literally. What I've got double land sound. This allows me to focus on my elbows, because remember in the punch I'm still thinking elbows. So the Sunim Tao concept of controlling my elbows and controlling my opponent's elbows, that's still there. And so when I'm turning here, I'm still thinking elbows. So this is land sound. And I turn from one side to the other. My hips move first, and then if I really exaggerate it, it'd be like this. The other thing you must concentrate on, so as you turn from side to side, is I must be going forwards this way and forwards this way. What I don't want to do is start swinging round and overshooting. I need to be going forwards, forwards, forwards in each movement. So what this is doing is this is giving you practice at controlling your balance while throwing energy forward. So when I'm punching, I'm not throwing myself off balance. Even if I have to punch all the way over there, I'm not losing balance. I've still got control over my body. I'm still grounded. I'm still connected to the floor. Because remember, we need that for the feedback. If we make a strike, remember it's all the energy is going forwards here, but as I meet something, there's going to be energy coming back. Whether it's something hanging on a sandbag on the wall, or 14 stone of nutcase running at me, which is what you're going to be hitting. So I need a strong stance to absorb it while still throwing as much power forward as I can and generating it with my turning stance. So this first part is all about turning stance, turning punch. So all the techniques you've done, whether it's turning Tan Sao or turning Gan Sao, where you're striking and covering, this first part of Chum Kui is giving you power in the strike. It's now fine-tuning it and turning it into what it should be. So that's the first part, which is generally the most difficult, and it's made even more difficult in that now your Buma is going to change. So usually as a training stance, Buma, you have one leg forwards, you have all your weight in your back leg, and you have square, so both hips are in line facing forwards. But once you learn Chum Kui, you can use that as a training tool, but that's not how you're going to use Buma, because it's not stable. What we now do is we take the hips and turn them, so we have a triangulated structure. So my two shoulders are still forwards, but my hips are now angled. and that gives me a far more solid structure to step in with. And remember, the 100% body weight on the rear leg is mainly for training and application. It could be anything. The main thing is you don't go past 50-50, because if you put your weight on your front leg, your face is closer to the strikes coming in, and if your leg is forward, it's likely to be attacked. So if it gets kicked or swept, or any number of things could happen to it, they could just drop down on one knee and punch your leg out from under you. If you have your weight all the way forwards, you're pretty vulnerable. So you want to keep your weight back. So 50-50, 60-40, with the preference on the weight coming towards the rear leg is how you want to be. It also makes it a lot easier to kick off the front leg. Although I'm not a particular fan necessarily of launching a kick if the opponent is static or moving around or not attacking, because I've found it not to be too effective, because you're not gaining a great deal of ground with a kick. If they're coming towards you and you want to launch a front kick, then that can work because they're already committed to coming in. If they're not coming in, if they're just standing there, they'll just move out of the way, or move out of the way and then hit you, or move around your kick. So that, just as a side note, that front kick, if you want to initiate it can be difficult if you're not following it immediately with something. And kicks is something you start to look at more and more in Chum Kui. So kicks are an awareness of the lower body, so how an opponent might attack your lower body, whether that be with kicks, or it could be sweeps or grappling. All of these things, Chum Kui is about learning an appreciation of the two halves of the body, how they work together, how you can utilise yours, and how it might be attacked by the opponent. So that's the weight distribution. So when you turn, when I'm in this position here, my hips are angled. I turn, the next position, my hips are once again angled to 45, but my shoulders are square. You can tell that by your lance out. What I'm looking to do is go forwards each time, that direction. If you're feeling particularly brave, I used to, when I was training this, I was living in a house with a really narrow walkway just to the side of the house, which is all solid brick, and the sort of thing where if you grazed an elbow you'd know about it. So I used to stand in the corridor, and that really made sure I did not swing my elbows out, but I went forwards. You should be able to do this in a very narrow space, and your elbow should not hit anything because you're not swinging out. And then that will translate, once you get these mechanics, they're going to translate into your punch in any way. I could be standing forwards this way and throw a punch forwards, my hips are generating the power here. I'm still doing it the same way. Or you could just have contact here and still use the hips to generate the power. Any hand strike, whether it be a side palm, faxal, anything, it's all about power generation. The first part of Chum Kui is your engine to develop power and utilise your stance. Or maybe someone's doing some particular grab, you can use some of that energy to move them to another position. A lot of times if someone's in training application, someone gets in close, maybe I parried the strike, but they're still coming, or I haven't stopped it, and they've got some sort of grab on me, I can use this energy to, unless you train really, really hard, you're not going to send them flying like they do in the movies, but it'll open up enough of a space for you to get a strike in or manipulate their body somehow. It'll give you some sort of space and opportunity to recover from that position. And that's the first part of Chum Kui. The other two parts deal with stepping. So Chum Kui also talks about, I won't talk about it today, but he also talks about your position relative to the opponent, and each three parts of the form consider a different position relative to the opponent. I will say the first part, this part that we're talking about, is about you being in the centre of a circle and the opponent moving round. So you're able to trace them. So remember, at each point of this turn, you should be able to go forwards. So we train it in the form to go all the way to the side, but you should be able to do it at 45 or at any degree, you should just be able to turn and go forwards. So when you're beginning, I would concentrate on form over function to a certain degree. So don't worry about getting a ton of power. Concentrate on the fact that when you turn, you're moving your hip first and then your upper body. Don't worry about the power, and then concentrate on going forwards. Once it's programmed into your body, then you can start adding power. It's there because you've learnt the method of generating the power, then you just employ that to deliver the power. But the first thing is you want to concentrate on the hips being at the right angle, not overshooting, not swinging out with your elbows. Make sure you're going forwards, and the hips first, the hips starting first, followed by the upper body, and then them both arriving together to deliver the power. Okay, so after the initial turning section, where you've gone left and then 1, 2, 3, you find yourself in this position here. From here, you can execute foot sao. Here. Now, foot sao is, it looks a little bit like bu sao, but it's not quite. It's got a little bit of a different application. So, whereas in bu sao would be an inverted tan sao, foot sao, whisking hand, it's a finding tool, just the same as your bong sao is used to find something coming in. Foot sao is used this way to find something and then apply, or maybe redirect, or whatever you find, really, whatever millions of numbers of things that could happen. It's soft. The fingers go towards the eye of the opponent to dissuade them coming in, just like bu sao. And it's just a finder. So maybe we'll go through this later on, but at the moment, that's the application. So you're here. So what's happening is what's important to remember is the elbows drop, fingers flick outwards. It's going to look like this from the front, and you're rotating from the middle of the forearm, just as in Sunim Tao, you rotate from the middle of the forearm. In foot sao, you're also doing that. Elbows not tucked in, because you're covering the outside gate. You don't tuck your elbows in because something can come in, so they're out. It's just the same as a wu sao. You do your Sunim Tao. This elbow is out from being tucked in because you're going from inside gate to covering on the outside gate. This is outside gate, so the elbow is out, not past the hip, but out. From here, double tan sao. And then you have tok sao jut sao. 1, 2, 3. So tok sao jut sao is technique in and of itself, in that you would find and then apply, maybe with a kick as well. Where one hand goes back, that's the jut sao, which is very like a lap action. This hand goes forwards to control, so it's going to have this effect on the opponent. Some say you might break their arm. Great if it works, but I'm dubious as to using that as something 100% that's going to happen. But it's a good controller, because the opponent's going to be in a poor position, and punching is going to be very difficult. The hand going back is there to straighten out the arm, so you can then jar and injure the elbow and then control from there. And keeping them at that distance is what allows you to kick, because you've got control of the opponent. The other, what you're also training is one hand going back and one hand going forwards, which you'll see movements like lap sao or pak sao here, and you're training it here. If you do the jut sao here, as you're kind of supposed to, you end up with a bunch of bruises on your arm, because it's the soft part of your inner arm. So what we tend to do is a loose hand technique, just because otherwise you end up with a load of bruises. From there, palm strikes. The thing to remember with palm strikes is you're going over the top, just the same as you would do with your punch, and when it comes back, make sure there's a wu sao there, so don't just throw palm strikes forwards. You've always got to have a guard's hand, a wu sao, because you don't know what's going to happen. If things go wrong, this is going to be your friend to keep you safe. So, after 3 palm strikes on the final one, the hand comes back, and you turn here. So you've turned, this hand comes back, this is a land sao. So the next thing, the next part is important. You're essentially measuring how your turning bong sao works. So to do that, I place my hand here. So this is my land sao, the correct height, the correct angle. If I place my wrist here, I turn. Now when I turn, it's important, both wrists stay at the same level, the same plane. And I lift my elbow, so I don't drop here, but I lift my elbow here. And that means I'm going to get a correct bong sao. What I want is for my wrist to be in front of my shoulder and for my wu sao to lay on that same line. Here, my elbow must be higher than my wrist, otherwise it's not going to function as a bong sao. This is not a bong sao. You can use that technique if you want, but it's not bong sao. This is bong sao, because it needs to be able to control, redirect, fold in this way. It's designed to collapse. It doesn't collapse this way because it'll clap in your head, collapse on your head rather. It needs to collapse this way. Later on, you'll find if you're collapsing too soon, you can drop the elbow over to control. If your elbow is not higher than your wrist, and collapsing this way, it's impossible to do that. So don't set yourself up for failure later on. And then I go back here. So here, bong sao. Now when I go back, I go to this position, and then I'm putting back here and back here. 2 energies happening. After 3 of those, rather than placing a palm here, I place a fist, and I withdraw this as I punch. Here. I then go square relative to the form, and I execute fak sao to cover here, and then the front. Important to remember, just as in Sunim Tao, when I fak sao, my elbow has to come past my shoulder, has to come behind, and I go forwards. My energy is going this way. It's not chopping around here, because it's not driven, it's not structured. Everything in Wing Chun is structured. So I have to go this way. If I'm just swinging my arm around my elbow joint, there's no structure. I'm just trying to gain enough speed and momentum to gain power, rather than putting my elbow behind here and driving forwards. It's also a covering motion, and if you don't bring the elbow back and you're just swinging, any strike or force coming this way will bowl you over. But if you get your elbow behind here and drive forwards, it will go past. In that situation, you probably wouldn't be side on, you more likely would have turned here, but still, you must get the principle in your head. Your elbow must come past the shoulder, drive forwards. So from here, I cover. Put a palm here, this is Tan Bu Sao, this hand goes back, this hand goes forwards, here, and here it's out. Now I repeat, starting from the other side, so I turn to the right and end up doing everything on the opposite side. So instead of here, I would be here. So there's a lot to talk about in Chum Kui. A lot of the applications I'm not going to talk about now. For instance, how it teaches you to deal with not only multiple opponents, but more likely a single opponent coming in at different angles. So a lot of times we make the mistake of always training application where we're standing straight on to our partner who's throwing some sort of attack to us. So even if they're throwing unpredictable attacks, it's still very predictable, and our tools work very predictably because they're standing in front of us. But if it's coming from an angle, or someone moves, or whatever, the opponent moves to the side and throws a strike, we need to know how to deal with that and how our tools work. And Chum Kui is teaching you this. in the first part of the form. That's why I was talking about you being in the centre of the circle and the opponent is on the outside. It's teaching you various angles and ways to deal with that, being on the centre and someone moving around you. The next parts also deal with you being on the outside and the opponent being on the centre of the circle, and how stepping allows you to deal with that as well. So that's Chum Kui in a nutshell. There's so much in this form. This is only the first part. But the main part is the power generation, your turning punches here, as well as this. Everyone has seen this technique, everyone who's done Sunim Tao, but in Chum Kui, you begin to learn it in depth. Part that follows, lap sao, or maybe you move and cover. These are all explored in partner exercises, which is a bit difficult to do at the moment. But the angle here is very important to know, because this is also the angle of all of your basic turning attacks, whether it's turning kan sao, jump sao, basic punches. That same angle is the one you're taking in this technique here. So it's very important to drill. So don't just run through the form. Drill each part of the form. You should be drilling this. Drill the energy. Certainly drill the first part of the form a lot, because it's arguably the most difficult part of the form. Okay, take it easy.